Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Yud Beis and Zbachim as we learn Frachem Kol Beis Yisrael and the Sunnah Batzar B'Shivya and a Gemara Chsim Tova to everyone. We'll start with the Mishnah on Yud Aleph from the Beis where we left off yesterday. A Pesach sheshachtu or shenishchatu shachris bar basar shelo lishmo. What's the halacha? A Pesach is supposed to be shechted. When you shech the korban Pesach? Only in the afternoon, after Chatzos on Erev Pesach, which is Yud Dalet. If a Pesach is shechted any other day of the year, from the 13th and back, or the 15th and on, it becomes a shlomim, and it's kosher, even if you did it shelo lishmo, especially if you did it shelo lishmo. If you did it lishmo, it would be puzzle. But if you shechted a Pesach any other day of the year, shelo lishmo, puzzle. What happens on the 14th in the morning? So here we have a difference of opinion. If you did it on the 14th in the morning, when it's not the time to shecht it, what's the deal? So a Pesach shechtu shachris b'basa shelo lishmo. Rabbi Shiur said it's kosher. Ki'ilu nishchit b'shloshes, as if it's on the 13th or on the 16th or on the 18th or any other day of the year. A Pesach shelo lishmo becomes a shlomim any other day of the year, and it's kosher. Then Beseira posel, he says no. Ki'ilu nishchit bein ha'arbayim. Why? Because if it's in the morning, he says it's a morning is like the afternoon, and apparently that means that it's just like it's kosher in the morning. It's kosher. It's just like it's kosher in the afternoon. It's also kosher in the morning. And if you shechted it shelo lishma in the morning, it's like you shechted shelo lishma in the afternoon. It would be puzzle. So that's what Yehuda says. Now we're going to have a machlokes in the Gemara. What does Ben Beseira really hold? Does he hold that you're allowed to shecht it in the morning lishma? That's the proper way to do it. Or does he say the morning is no good? The morning is no good whether you did it lishma or shelo lishma. It's not good lishma because lishma is only supposed to be in the afternoon. And shelo lishma is also not good because the 14th is still the day on which you're supposed to shecht it. So that's the issue. Everybody agrees that if it's on the 13th, the 12th, the 11th backwards, or the 15th, 16th, 17th, any other fours, that shelo lishma is a shlom. The machlokas here is, what happens if you shecht it in the morning of the 14th? In the afternoon of the 14th, you're supposed to shecht lishma. If you did a shelo lishma, it's puzzle. That's the first mission in the Masechet. What happens if you do it in the morning now? So that's the machlokas. Rav Shapiro says it's kosher. It's like the 13th. Rav Meir says it's puzzle. No, it's like you did it in the afternoon. As if you did it on the 14th in the afternoon. Amar Shimon ben Azai. Shimon ben Azai adds on something here now, which is really an addendum to the first mission in the Masechet. Amar Shimon ben Azai. I have a Kabbalah from the 72 Zkanim. We'll see why why it's called Zakein, not Zkanim. B'yom sheshivas Rabbi Lezer ben Azar. In the day they put Rabbi Lezer ben Azariah into office, the day they had a machlokas there, when they deposed the previous Av Bezdin because of machlokas there, and he was mevaza. So it says that on that day when they put Eliezer ben Azariah into office, they made many halachas there. They decided many halachas. B'yeshiva when they set him up there. Shekol zbachim. This is the rule. Kol zbachim shenizbuch shelo lishma on all karbanos. All karbanos that you do shelo lishma are kosher. El shel bam shem chava, like we saw in the first Mishnah. All kosher chutz mi pesach mechatas. This is exactly the words of the Mishnah. If a lo hosif ben Azai, the Ben Azai added on. Some say this is like a later addition to the Mishnah. The Ben Azai added on. We'll see in the Gemara it's mashma that he heard this from the 72 Zkanim. He added on the Ola. He added on Ola also, that an Ola shelo lishma is also puzzle. Not like we saw in the Mishnah that Ola is kosher, except not Lo Avam Shem Chavi is not Yotzei, but rather an Ola's puzzle like Chatas and Pesach. But the other Chum were not moted to him. That's what the Mishnah said. Amar Rabbi Elazar. So now Rabbi Elazar is going to, Amar Elazar Oshia, we're going to have a different opinion. What is Pshat in Mem Seir? Mem Seir says if you shechted in the morning of the 14th, it's if you shechted it in the afternoon, and therefore he says that if you did it Shelo Lishma, it's puzzle. He says, if you did it lishmo, if you did it properly. In other words, Rav Oshia is saying that according to Ben Beseira, the 14th of the morning is like 14th in the afternoon. We know you're supposed to shech in the 14th in the afternoon. He says, you know what? Ben Beseira, the 14th is also okay. Therefore, you did it lishmo in the morning, it's kosher. You did it shelo lishma, it's puzzle. In the Mishnah, he said, if you did it shelo lishma, it's puzzle because it's like the afternoon. So he's saying, so Rav Oshia is sort of extrapolating from Ben Beseira, if the morning is puzzle shelo lishma because it's like the afternoon, then if you did it lishma, it's kosher. The kul yom is imel. That's what Rav Oshia says. We'll see that's not the halacha. That's not the dominant opinion in Rav Oshia. We'll see a different opinion of Rav Yochanan later on. But he says that according to Ben Beseira, you could shech the whole day. The whole day of Pesach is not just in the afternoon. You could shech it in the morning too. If you did it l'shma, it's kosher. If you did it l'shma, it's puzzle. So why does he say it's as if you shecht it in the afternoon? It's mamish, the morning is okay. You don't have to say the morning is okay because it's like you did it in the afternoon. The morning is mamish mutzah according to Sarah. Mike Ilu, since Rabbi Yeshua, who said if you shecht it in the morning, it's kosher. It's like the 13th. Since he said Ki'ilu, Amri Yunami Ki'ilu. Okay, so Yachi, if that's the case, why do they argue if you did it Shalol Lishma in the morning? That Rav Meir says it's no good because the morning is the time for Pesach. Did Shalol Lishma, it's puzzle. And Rabbi Yeshua says it's kosher. Lifigu Lishma, why don't they just argue? Are you allowed to do it Lishma in the morning? That Rabbi Yeshua would say Lishma is no good in the morning because it's like the 13th. And Rav Meir would say it is good. The morning is like the afternoon. If they would argue about Lishma, but if it would be Shalishma, maybe Motor B'Shua that it's possible. Whole Mitzvah Roy, since part of the day is fit, even according to Rav Yeshua, since part of the day, the afternoon is fit. So if you did it Shalol Lishma in the morning, maybe it would be puzzle. Kamashma, the Chiddush is the big Chiddush of Rav Yeshua that if you shecht it in the 14th in the morning Shalol Lishma, that it's kosher. It's like the 13th. Okay. So the problem here is, so Rav Oshi is saying that according to Sarah, the morning is just like the afternoon. You could shecht it in the morning, lishma. That's who it's proper to do that. If you shecht it shalol lishma, it's possible. Just like in the afternoon, it would be possible if you did it. That's what he says. But if that's the case, what's pshat in bein harbayim? If that's the case, says the Gemara, I've accepted bein harbayim. Says bein harbayim. What does our bein harbayim mean? So we're going to have a bunch of dochlik answers here. Bein harbayim, Amar Ula, Brei Rav Eloi, bein shnei haravim means this: between the two evenings. Meaning, when does the evening before end? At dawn, right? At Alos HaShachar. Between that evening and the next evening, that's what means. Bein harbayim means between the two eras. In other words, the 13th going into the 14th, in the morning of the 14th, that's the end of the previous evening, and you could shecht it all day till the next evening. Okay, that's your answer. Tamid d'chseh bein harbayim. What about the carbon tamid? One is in the morning, one's in the evening. Bein harbayim means in the evening, from the afternoon on after chatzos hayom. So you're going to say the whole day is kosher. So are you going to say you could shecht the two karbanos tamid? Do one in the morning. The other one could also be any time, even 10 o'clock in the morning. So since it says there, since it says since you said since one's in the morning, smash the other one's in the afternoon. So maybe, but the aima maybe it means chad b'boker. One has to be in the morning. It's like but the other one could do any time, later in the morning, in the afternoon, whatever you want, right? Kuliyoma. The answer is no. Echad b'boker v'lo shnai b'boker. Since it says it's mashma, you can't do the other one in the morning. So, and the answer is that bein harbayim there. In other words, the lashon of bein harbayim can really mean the whole day. Right, that's what he says. According to Rav Oshia, that's Shandam Sefer, that the morning is like the afternoon when it comes to carbon Pesach. What about by carbon Tamid? There it only means, even though it says Bein harbayim, it can't mean the morning there because you already have B'Boker. What about Neiris Bein harbayim? There it also says Bein harbayim. Machanam Dekul Yom Kiddushech the whole day. There it says in addition to Bein harbayim, it says Me'erev ad Boker. The time Me'erev ad Boker. What does it mean? 10 like midasa, meaning you have to give enough oil that even in the longest night of the year, let's say the beginning of the winter, it's got to be, you put enough oil there that it lasts enough for the entire night, even on a long night, like a long winter night. In the summer, it'll be a little bit extra. So if it lights a little bit during the day, that's okay too. What does it say about Boker? There's no other avodah ksher me'erev boker. All the other avodah shechita kabbalah halachos reek have to be during the day. There's no halacha which is kosher in the evening, only in the evening, from the evening till the morning. Elazu b'vad. Okay, so that's what he says. Even though Neir says it's bein harbayim, and you say bein harbayim itself might mean the whole day, but there it has me'erev boker. What about Ktoris? Ktoris, we know we do pras boker, pras bein harbayim. Every day, the Kohen Gadol brings half in the morning, half in the evening. The Siv there, Ben Abayim, Ochanam the Kulyom could also do it the whole day, including in the morning. The Kulyom Kosher says, no, Shani Torah, discussion there. Says, Hekesh between Neiros and, says, Valos Aranis and Neiros, find a Ben Abayim, the Torahs. So there it says Neiros when we're talking about when we're talking about Ktoros, we also mentioned Neiros there. So there's Ekesh between them. So it's like Neiros. That's the means Daf in the night. So why don't you say there too? You're saying that according to Rav saying according to Bemseira, the whole day you can shech Korban Pesach even in the morning, but it says Sham Tisbech Pesach be'erev in the evening. So again, his answer is doesn't know if it's me in the evening. But that's to tell me liyucha davar who does. It's come to tell me that if you have two korbanos, a Pesach and a Toda and a Tamid, you bring the Pesach in the evening, meaning you bring it later. It doesn't mean to say it's to be in the evening. Technically, you could bring the Korban Pesach at 9 o'clock in the morning. Just telling you there, but Erev is telling you that if you have two korbanos, bring Pesach later. The Tanya Yucha Davar Shnimba by Erev Ube'er Bayim. By Pesach it says Be'er Bayim and Erev, so that should be brought later. The Davar Shalom Bayim. The Talmud only says Be'er Bayim, doesn't say Be'erev, so that should be brought later. Bavad. So does that make sense? Says the Gemara Mika Midi. Is there something? If you shechted the Korban Pesach at 7 o'clock in the morning, you're saying that's the time. But if you left it till late in the afternoon, that it's got to be later than the Talmud. Does that make sense? That makes sense. If you could shech the Pesach in the morning, why do you have to shech it after the Talmud in the evening? If you left it till later, saying it does make sense. Rabbi Yochanan himself said, the posting in there said, even though Musaf you daven in the morning, it's good till 7 hours a day. But if you already waited so long that it's already time for mincha, you should first daven mincha and then Musaf, right? So even though the Musaf could be brought in the morning, but if you already waited with it till mincha, you bring the mincha first, right? Okay, so why does it say Bein Arbaim at all? If you're saying by Torah's learned from Neiros, and there it says what? Me'er Boker. So why does it have to say it all Bein Arbaim? It's meaningless. If Bein Arbaim means the whole day, why do you even have to mention it? Just say Erev Boker. Ba'od, Peshav Rebbe, Tachas B'Mseira, Rebbe answered, defended B'Mseira. He says, I don't according to you, Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua saying in the Mishnah that if you shechted the Korban Pesach in the morning of the 14th, Shalol Lishma, it's like you shechted Shalol Lishma on the 13th or the 12th, meaning it's a Shlom, it's kosher. He says, Lo, Imam, Roy. In the morning of the reason why it's kosher if you shechted Shalol Lishma, the Korban Pesach on the 13th of Nisan, because even it's not Roy to shecht it at all that day. Tomer Bar Basar, Shemiksaso Roy. Part of his Roy. Havim Isa Kula Roy. According to you, Roshia, Rebbe, the Rebbe the Tana should have said the whole day is fit on the 14th, because you claim that the whole day is fit on the 14th, according to your Pshat and Bemseira. Ella, so therefore, Rav Oshia's interpretation of Bemseira, that if you shechted on the 14th in the morning, Lishma, it's kosher, that the whole day is really kosher for Korban Pesach. And that's why if you shechted Shalol Lishma on the morning 14th, it's possible, is wrong, or at least he seems to be defeated. Ella Rabbi Yochanan, no, postally Bemseira Pesach Shechted Barbaso Shachris Bein Lishma Bein Lishmo. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Everybody agrees. The 13th, the 12th, the 16th, the 18th, whatever, any other day of the year that you did a Shalosh Lishma, it's kosher. Right? It's like a shlamim. However, when you're supposed to shech the Korban Pesach, only in the afternoon of the 14th. If you shech it in the morning, it's puzzle. It's got to be in the afternoon. Bein Arbayim means afternoon. It's got to be in the afternoon. And therefore he says, whether you shech the Lishma or Shalol Lishma, if you shech the Lishma in the morning of the 14th, that's no good because it's not the right time. It's got to be in the afternoon. If you shech the Shalol Lishma, it's also puzzle because the 14th is partially okay, is partially the time to do it. It's partially either way. Whole Mitzvah Roy, since part of it's Roy to be on the 14th, part of the 14th is kosher, that would be in the afternoon. If you shech it in the morning, it's partially kosher, and therefore if you did a Shalosh Shema, it's puzzle. And if you did a Shema, it's also no good because he didn't do Bein Arbayim. Makara Baravus, or Ravus screamed at him. What are you talking about? If you're saying in the morning of the 14th, it's puzzle, if you did a Lishma or Shalol Lishma, when are you supposed to set aside the Korban Pesach? If you separate it right now on the morning of the 14th, it's already rejected from the beginning. It's puzzle. If you did it on the 13th, on the 13th it was okay because you could have done a Shalol Lishma for a Shlamim. But on the morning of the 14th, you can't shech the Korban Pesach. No, in any manner whatsoever, Lishma or Shalol Lishma. So when were you mafresh the carbon? If you were mafresh in the morning, it's possible right away. If you were mafresh it yesterday on the 13th, it was originally fit and then it became rejected. So either way, it's rejected. It's very simple. It's kosher if you separate it and if you set it aside, you were makdish it after in the afternoon of the 14th, meaning Erev Pesach in the afternoon. You can do it in the morning. Since it's roy to fit that day, that's not considered mechusas man. It's not considered not roy. You're not allowed to shech lishma or shelo lishma, but it's not unfit. It's not disqualified. You could even have set it aside the night before. The night, meaning Orla Basar, the night of going into the 14th. Laila in mechusas man. If you shech it, even though you don't shech the night, shchita kabbalah off be during the day. But if you set it aside at night, it's not considered mechusas man. You're allowed to makdish. You just can't bring it yet. The center of Yishmael, Leil Shmini. Remember, we'll see in a second. By when could you shech the carbon? Shoro kesev oiski voled vaya shivas yamim tachasimo 7 days. It's got to be with his mother. What about the night going into the 8th day? The night between the 7th and 8th day. You could set it aside and be mafresh the carbon meiser of the night. You could put it in the saser. Apturiki rather. The Rav Apturiki Rami says the kash seems to be a steer. Pasuk says for 7 days you can't be mafresh. You can't bring it as a carbon. Halayla, but the night after the 7th day mashme chazi is fit. Uksivin also says only on the 8th day yiratza. Only on the 8th day will it be accepted. You can appease God with that. So what's the halacha of the night? Halayla lochas. It's mashma the night. You can't. Okay, so laila l'kedusha v'yom l'artzah. You could be makdish it at night. You could set it aside and make it a carbon at night. And during the day, you're maratza. You bring it as a carbon. You shecht it and you appease God that way. So that's the pshat. So Rabbi Yochanan's, for the first answer, Rabbi Yochanan was well. Rabbi Yochanan says in the morning it's no good lishma or shalishma. Bring it in the afternoon. Abaye says no. You could even bring it in the morning because it's not considered mechusar zman. It's not considered early or disqualified because that day is okay. Rabbi Papa says even the night before. When you gave the answer to Rabbi Yochanan, how can you be mafresh a carbon according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you set it aside a few days before Pesach or the day before, it's near v'nitcha, and if it's that morning, it's nitcha mikara. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, mashma bal chayim nitcha. So your answer was that you brought it in the afternoon, but it's mashma according to Rabbi Yochanan bal chayim nitcha. Can an animal that's alive be disqualified? In other words, it's as far to say only if you shechted it, you're a bit of a mock of it, and something happened to it, then it's puzzle. But if it's while it's alive, it can't be that's what we thought maybe it can't be disqualified. So he says no. Rabbi Yochanan says it is disqualified because he said if you're mafresh it in the morning, that's already disqualified. If mafresh the day before, it's near v'nitcha. Either way, the animal's still alive. Then it's mashmiya amar. Yes, he holds that bal chaim is nitcha. Let's say you have an animal that belonged to two partners, and of course they're going to have a fight, right? They're partners. What do they do except fight? So one person, Reuven and Shimon, owned an animal together. Reuven was makdish his half. Now, can you bring that as a carbon? No, half of it isn't. He doesn't have the right to be makdish the other half, right? So half is and then because of Allah, when he was makdish half, it was puzzle. Can't bring it as a carbon. Because then he bought the other half from Shimon, right? He bought him out, as we say. What do partners do? They buy each other out. He bought him out. Big dish, and then he was makdish the other half. Kedusha v'enekrevet. Now the whole animal is kadosh, but you can't bring it as a carbon. Why? Why? Because it was disqualified from the beginning. When you were makdish a little bit, it was disqualified. Now this animal, though, partners can't make it more because it says lo yomi, and as we had it before, it says it in the lashon of yachid. But now that it's kadosh, it can make a tamura. In other words, you're not supposed to make a tamura, but you can say arezeh kazeh, and A can become, and you can make B like A. But the tamura also cannot be brought as a carbon because it has the same kedusha as the original one, right? Can't bring it since the kedusha wasn't nearer. You can't bring it as a carbon. What you do is you wait till it gets a moment, you sell it, and you buy another animal with it. Okay, so. It's now that it does, you could make a tamur, and the tamur is the same. It's just like B is like A. Shema see three things. Shema bal chaim nitchen. That as soon as he made it kadosh or his half, even while it was alive, and yet you say it's disqualified. You don't say it only becomes disqualified once you shechted it. It's qualified, right? Even though it was originally disqualified, because as soon as he tried to sanctify it, it was already impossible to bring as a carbon. because only half of it's Kaddish, half's not. When he was Makdish half, it didn't have Kedushas Aguf. It's only Dichei Damim. It only had Kedushas Damim, that it had Kedusha that you could sell it, but didn't have Kedushas Aguf. And you could see even if just had Kedushas Damim, it could still be disqualified in that case. Says top Rashi, Yesh Torah's Dichei Kedushas Damim Af B'Shein Kedushas Aguf. Go Nacha Shehikdash Chetzia. He only owns half. The kedusha cannot spread out over the whole animal. And you don't say the kedusha stomach is not strong enough to have it disqualified. Amar Ula, top line on Amid Beis. Let's say a person ate chaylev by mistake, right? And now he has to bring a carbon chatas, the ifish carbon, and then he became an apostate. The rule is an apostate cannot bring a carbon because it says if a person brings a chatos, it says me'ama oretz. It means from the congregation, from the people of the land, excluding an apostate, excluding a person who was meimer das, right? A person who was a meimer. So now we say here a mumar rather. He was meimer, he becomes a mumar. So let's say he separated his animal. He was going to bring a chatas while he was a good Jew, but he made a mistake, and then he became an apostate, and then he gave up on the apostasy, because the animal became disqualified as soon as he became a mummer. A mummer can't bring the carbon. So once it was disqualified, it was disqualified. Here again, even though the animal was alive. Similar idea that dichui mikara is a dichui, and a dichui balchaim are nitchen, and the dichui mikara is a dichui. A similar case. Let's say he ate by mistake. He set aside a carbon chatas that he was going to bring. Benishtat became insane. Now he also can't bring it when he's insane because you have to have a bardas. He's not a bardas. Then he became healthy again. He regained his sense, right? Same thing. Since the animal became disqualified when he became insane, why do you have to tell me both cases? The first case, he pushed himself out. In other words, he became an apostate. He caused the person who had to bring the carbon, he caused his own disqualification. Now should be a dime. He did it by himself, so to speak, by becoming an apostate. But a person became insane by accident, right? Maybe it's like he fell asleep. If you set aside a carbon, you fell asleep, you slept overnight. Does that mean you're not by your seichel? No, it's temporary. A person who's insane, a person who's asleep is like temporary insanity. So I might think that's not so bad. So it comes to no, that also ruins the animal, becomes disqualified. When he's insane, he doesn't have the ability to return to his normal state himself. Naturally, it can happen, but he can't do it himself. There might say it's qualified. But in the case where he became an apostate, he could just do tshuva right away. I might think I might think that if the animal doesn't become disqualified, therefore he tells me both cases. What about this case? He ate carbon, he set aside a carbon. We learned at the beginning of Horias, not the halacha. The first mission Horias said that Bezdin paskin wrong. And one person followed that psak. Remember, the halachas is only if most of the people follow psak, they give part of Dal Mishal Tzibur. But if individuals do it, they bring a chatas chaylev on their own. But the first Mishnah said that if one person followed that, he's potter, the carbon, he doesn't bring it. So what happens there? If he sinned, that he ate chaylev, then he was mafresh carbon, and Bezdin then paskin that it's mutter, and then they retracted, they rescinded their rule. What do you say there, Mao? Mi avidichui. Olo, is he considered disqualified or not? Right? So when one of the elders there said, when I was learning the halachas of dichui, betchuyin, may help pasach. He dafka started with this case. This is a good case. My timer. What's the reason? Hasam gavra itchi, carbon lo itchi. In that case, the person was disqualified. Hacha carbon itchi. In the case where the person became an apostate or where he became insane, nothing wrong with the carbon. The carbon was okay, but he became disqualified, so to speak. He became insane or became a mummer. Here, the carbon itself became disqualified. Why? Because once Bezdin paskin that you're allowed to eat chaylev, there's no purpose in the carbon itself. So therefore, this is certainly a case of dichui. Omer Shimon ben Azai. I have a Kabbalah from the 72 Skanim that all karbanos you bring shalosh shma are kosher, but the law about the balam is not yotze, except for chatos and pesach. And he added on, as we'll see in the Gemara, from the zikanim, these 70 zikanim added on one more ola. But the other chacham were not moda. The chacham of our mission and Daf Beis Malach were not moda. Let me misna shivim sham zakein. Why shivim sham zakein? I'm not about diktik, but we all know that it's shivim v'shnayim is plural. Should be skanim. It says the kula b'chada shitz to tell you that they all agree, which is a miracle in and of itself. Right? Many times we've had fights here in the shul over meetings, and some Israeli gets them said, no, everybody should accept it, but pe'achad, everybody should agree, right? It doesn't work that way in real life. But here, they agreed 72. 72 people all agree, therefore he calls it like one person. Okay. Says the Gemara, Lo sepenase alola. Why? My time up to Masa. Why did Ben Azai say, in other words, what do we learn in the first mission of the Masechet? That which karbanos are puzzle entirely if you better shalosh shma? Only chatos and pesach and Rebbe Lezer. We had a whole discussion with Rebbe Lezer. He added on asham, right? Because he said chatos is brought for a sin, asham is brought for a sin. So they argued back and forth, and he says, well, it says kachatos ka asham. It says kachatos ka asham, so asham has the same rule. But we didn't see anything about Ola. Ben Azai over here adds on, he learned from these 72 skanim, even Ola too. Now, if I wouldn't have learned the Gemara on Daf Yud Gimel, I wouldn't have known that he said it in the name of the Skanim. It sounded like he heard the 72 Skanim said only Chatos and Pesach, and he added on Ola also. But we'll see in the Gemara, it's mashba that he added on from the 72. Amar Puna, my time it says Ola. It says Ola hu isherech nechol Hashem. Ola hu, right? He lishum, right? Ola shah. He lishum if it's a shma ksher shma psula, because there's Ola, it's got to be an Ola, right? Like Chatos he, right? So Hashem Nami Iksib Behu by Hashem also says who. So who lachar tosim as we mentioned before, when it says who by Hashem, that's after you burn the fatty parts of the animal and who to sieve. That's what it says. And there as we said, that's like that you don't have, that's not ma'akev anyway. So it's not that if it says who by shchita, that's different. It doesn't say who by shchita when it comes to Hashem. By Ola it also says after Aktar Semurim. It says Treyuksiv, it says two times who by Ola, right? It says who by Ola. Rashi quotes them. If you change, Rashi quotes the two that it says. Rashi says Treyuksiv, Ve'emen Shenim Nachadiv Taksiv Chada Taratuli Lavras Shoshman Chadahu Ksiv Be'el Osham Shol Miluim Vata Tzava V'Chad Vayikra Gabriel says twice. Says Gemara says Gabriel Osham Nami Treyuksiv. So you could also say there too, and Rashi quotes those psukim also. Ella Ben Azai. So how does he know? How did Ben Azai get this idea? He doesn't agree with Rebbe Lezer that he adds on Asham, that Asham Shlosh Shma is puzzle, but he adds on Ola. Where did he get Ola from? Ella Ben Azai Kal B'chomer, my sons for Kal B'chomer. What's the Kal B'chomer? Umar Chatas, Shenikam Chatas, which is not totally burnt. Shach Shma is Psula, Ola, Shikshola, Ola is totally burnt in that sense. Even though we have a rule that Chatas and Ola that are brought together, you always bring the Chatas first, but Ola, so to speak, has more Kedusha because it's totally burnt. Well, Koshkan certainly should be possible being Shoshma. The Gemara says no. Malach Chatas Shem Mechaperes. Chatas has a different Chomer that atones for a sin. Ola doesn't atone for a sin. Remember, Ola we said is a Doron, is a gift. Pesach is not for a sin, and Pesach is Shoshma is puzzle. Mal Pesach came Mal Kavut, it's got a fixed time. Ola and Chatas don't. Well, look at Chatas Techich, which doesn't have a fixed time. Chazar din lo saying go back and forth. Each one has a different characteristic. What's the combination? That's the common denominator of Pesach and Chatas. Shane Kachim, they're Kachim. Shachna Shma is puzzle. They're both Kachim. If you Shma is puzzle, Afan if Ola, I'll bring Ola. Shu Kachim Shachna Shma is also Psula. The Gemara says, yeah, but Mal Tzav Shein Sheish Ben Sad Kores. Each one, but both Pesach and Chatas if it's Sad Kores. Why? Chatas is brought for a sin that if you did it b'meisi it'd be Chatas, and Pesach if you don't bring his Chatas. So the Gemara says Ben Azai Sad Kores Lepach. He doesn't ask that kasha. He doesn't hold that kasha for that goof of reason, right? Because there's two different reasons. It's not a common thing that they both have Kores. Pesach is brought. Pesach is if you didn't bring the korban you chayiv Chatas. Whereas the Chatas is for a sin that you're chayiv Kares for, therefore he doesn't ask that kasha. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, so Asham Nami Laisi. So why don't you know also for that reason? We went back and forth by Asham, what's the reason why? And we said, why don't you learn from Ma'atzad? Why don't you say also, what's the Shad Shavan of Chatas? Why don't you learn Chatas, why don't you learn Asham from Chatas and Pesach? Right? What's the Shad Shavan that they're Kachim and Yid Shloshma Apostle? There should also be Asham Nami Laisi Asham let's say asham, right? And say right. And why don't you give that reason? You didn't give that reason before. Rashi brings down in the narrow lines. We had this discussion before. Rav Yusha back on Yud Beis. And the Gemara says, why don't you learn from Mad Sad? And we didn't have a good answer. But if the reason why we didn't learn Asham before is because they both have a Sad Kares. Remember Pesach Hazan. But if Benazai doesn't hold of this Sad Kares, because they're two different. One is the reason for not bringing the carbon. One is the reason for the sin. One's the reason for bringing the carbon. One's the reason for not if you didn't bring in the carbon. So if he doesn't hold of that, why can't he learn Asham? So right. So the answer is Parach Asham Nami Laisi. Says Asham Parach by Asham. We could ask Mal Shavshem Shein Keshem B'Tzibor Kivi Yachid. Achatos is Achatos Tzibor, Chazbar Tzibor. Pesach, even though it's an individuals bring it, but since everybody brings it together, it's also considered like a Tzibor. Whereas Asham is only an individual. That's why I can't learn out Asham from that. Or you by saying it's Tzad Kares, or you could say that he does hold of Tzad Kares, like we said the Gemara Yud Beis, that Pesach and Chatos both have a Tzad Kares, Asham does not. Ben Azai, the reason Ben Azai added on Ola and not Asham, reasons Gemara Gomerla, he had a Kabbalah, and Rashi says Gomerla, mi pi ayin beis kanim, it's not. In other words, Rashi here is explaining the Mishnah, that when he added on Ola, that's what he learned from the Shem Shaims Kanim. Otherwise, you could ask, he's adding on what is the Shem Shaims Kanim? That's the first Mishnah, which is presumably the Rabbanan anyway. But from the 17th Kanim, he also learned that idea that Ola is added on. It's a Kabbalah. It's just a tradition. It's Allah Namash Misinai. Ola is also puzzle. Rafuna said when you couldn't learn it out from one or the other. Remember when he said because the who doesn't work, right? Because otherwise, when I add on Asham also, so he said, we learn from a Kal V'chomer, right? From a Kal V'chomer, and then we come out to Matzad. What about the Kal V'chomer? The Kal V'chomer lo Omer ela l'chad v'adam. If his whole reason was based on what? On a Halach Moshe Misina, he had a Kabbalah from his Rebbe's that way. Why talk about Svaras and Sukkim and Kal V'chomer? He just wanted to sharpen the minds of the Talmidim. Either Sheikhlo Tshuva Alav, they say he was trying to say, listen, what about this Kal V'chomer? To see how they would answer the Kal V'chomer, or to teach them the general idea of learning Kal V'chomers that you should be able to darshan, because the Kal V'chomer you could darshan on your own. Says the Mishnah. So we learned that if you shech shel shma, Pesachatas are totally puzzle. You know what? It's not just shchita. The other avodas also. Shchita can be done by a zor, but it's considered an avoda, right? It's considered avoda. The other ones, Kabbalah, Halacha, and Zrika, have to be done only by a kohen, right? Because they're considered a sheirut. Not only is it avoda, even though the shchita is an avoda that can be done by a zor, and the zor can't do the other ones. The other ones are called more than an avodah. They're called a sheirut. They're called a service. So if you did, not only if you shechted a shel shma, but if you did either Kabbalah, Halacha, or Zrika, shel shma is also puzzle. Oh, shel shma, or maybe in one of the avodas you had two kavanas, l'shma and shel shma, or shel shma l'shma. So they're all puzzle. Kates of l'shma shel. What's an example? We had a kavanah l'shma shel shma, l'shem pesach, l'shem shlomim. I'm bringing a carbon pesach. You're supposed to bring it l'shma, and I brought l'shem pesach, l'shem shlom. That was my kavanah. And again, we said you don't have to actually say I'm bringing it l'shem psachim, because the rabbi said you shouldn't do it unless you say shalol l'shma. But if you had a kavanah and you had a kavanah l'shma and shalol l'shma, that would be puzzle. Or shalol l'shma. In other words, it's got to be pure. Got to be 100% l'shma. Shalol, even though stam is also l'shma, but you can't have a kavanah shalol l'shma. What's shalol l'shma b'l'shma? L'shem shlom, l'shem pesach. She'azevach nifsel ba'ar b'dvarim. The pesach the carbon becomes possible by all four things. What are the ones that become possible? Only chatas and pesach, according to everybody. Reb Lezer adds on asham, and as we saw, Ben Azai adds on ola, but we only hold chatas and pesach. We go with the chachamim. If you do any one of those four with the kavanah of shalol shma, it's possible. Reb Shimon Reb Shimon says hilach or holacha is okay. Why? Because it's not. You don't even have to do it. You can't avoid doing shchita kabbalah zrika. There's no way to avoid shechting the animal, getting the blood from the animal in the mizrak, in the bowl, and being zarek on the sprinkling it on or smearing it on the mizbeach. If you didn't do those things, you didn't bring the carbon. But it's possible to do without halacha. Why? If you shechted it right next to the mizbeach, So you could just be makabel the dam and zarek right away without walking. You do it without moving at all. You could be standing Shemoneh Esrei and doing it, right? So then you wouldn't have kavanah, but you can't do it. And as the other ones are impossible, but this can be, you can do it without. Therefore, a kavanah. Hashem says if you had a kavanah by halacha of shalol lishma, that wouldn't ruin it because the halacha itself doesn't even have to be done. You could stand next to Mizbeach and do it. Rabbi Lazar, it's Rabbi Lazar, it's Rabbi Lazar ben Shemu. It's not Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Hamahalch makom shu tzarich la'alech machshava pasasba. If you have to walk, meaning you did it in a way, and you have to walk to the Mizbeach, so if you had a bad kavanah there, then it does ruin it, right? Let's say you went far away, you made a roundabout way, you didn't have to walk there at all. Then the halacha was not necessary. Right, so so Rabbi Lazar holds a little bit like Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon says halacha b'chlal, you don't have to have kavanah l'shma, you can have a kavanah l'shma. Rabbi Lazar qualifies that a little bit, says it depends. If you're walking in a place where you have to walk, like you're going in a direct line to the mizbeach, then it's necessary, and therefore bad machshava would ruin it. If you walked in a place where you didn't have to walk, then a bad machshava would not ruin it. All right, tomorrow's Gemara will start here on the Kabbalah. We'll be on the podcast. Hashem, and on Sunday morning we'll start at the same time, 5:00 from the 9th line on Daf Yomi. There's 2 dots there. The first 2 dots on the page. We'll pick it up from there. Shabbat shalom, Gemar Chatima Tova to everybody. Kol Tuv.
Kol Tuv, take care.